What is happening in Iran? Is there going to be a war with Iran? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Hey, Harley. Hey, Alex. Friday the 6th of February. Harley, is there going to be a war with Iran? Thank you again. Please like, comment, subscribe, and give us a thumbs up. And you'll find all the links for the guests in the description below.
Well, I think it's still a question. I think if it's up to President Trump, there will not be. But there are people around him, including Miss Lindsey Graham, people like Pompeo and others who still have influence, and the Zionist lobby, who really have no other purpose in life right now except to wipe Iran off the face of the earth. So the question is, how do you combat that? And this is where the diplomacy that's underway, there's a meeting today between Iran and the United States. We'll see how far that goes. But it's a touch and go situation.
Alex?
Well, I agree with Harley that to the extent that it's up to Donald Trump, there is not going to be a war. And my suspicion is that this is what's going to happen. Or if there is a war, it's going to be a fake one. Meaning, like what we had last June, when Trump did launch an attack on Iran, but the whole thing lasted 25 minutes. Grand total of 40 bombs and missiles hit pre-announced targets that were communicated to the Iranians 48 hours in advance, so that nothing was really, there were no casualties. And then the Iranians responded in kind. So it was a bit of a, World Wrestling Federation kind of clash. Lots of fireworks, but no real damage, let's say. And for anybody who would, dispute that, compare what happened last June in Iran to real wars like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya.
Yeah.
That's when Serbia in 1999, when they go to war for real, it becomes like a conveyor belt of bombs and missiles that doesn't stop for weeks. That's real. This was not real. This was a 25-minute thing. And I think it's extremely important to avoid this war for the Trump administration. And I think that the pressure for them to do this is being applied through via Israel and the whole Zionist lobby in the United States, simply by pressure. As they said, they're trying to flood the zone around Trump. And I think that Trump is determined not to give that to them.
Alex, the key issue there is this question of boots on the ground, because if you're going to have a regime change in Iran, you can't do it without sending troops in.
Yes.
And this is where, what you're referring to, the bombing of Syria, the bombing of Iran, these were air attacks. They didn't include boots on the ground. Now, the boots on the ground that are there are probably MI6 and Mossad, but they don't have the capability on their own to enact a regime change. And with the midterm elections coming up this November, if Trump were to go for a full war with American troops and seeing American soldiers coming back in body bags, which would happen if there was a full-scale war, this would break apart what's left of the MAGA coalition, because the real loyal Trumpers would stay with him. But we see with Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others who are really loyal to him have split off on this question of America first. And he doesn't want that. And I think he genuinely intends to put an end to the kind of unilateralism. On the other hand, he keeps talking as a unilateralist, saying, I own Venezuela, I'm going to own Greenland. So there are mixed signals coming out.
Can I just say something on that, Harley, which is that it's not his style at all. This is not how he does war, the way that Obama did, the Bushes did, the Clintons did. He just doesn't do that. And I actually do believe he has a very strong anti-war sentiment. And I reference what Martin Armstrong often says, that when he met Trump, Martin Armstrong's met many presidents and prime ministers and stuff, and he said Trump's the only one who talked about ordinary servicemen being killed. And he said the same in his address to the United Nations and the WEF last year, talking about these ordinary men, the Russian and Ukrainian men, beautiful young men, I remember him saying, dying for nothing. So I actually do think that he has a real, genuine, authentic concern for the harm that war does to ordinary people, which all three of us share. So I don't think he will. Plus, also a point that you made earlier, Alex, in one of your articles or videos that you might have even done with someone else, Alex, about how it would send the price of oil through the roof. And then that would be damaging to the American economy and the American people, because everything would get more expensive and people vote with their pocketbooks. So I don't think so. If he does anything, it'll be a very limited strike, like what happened with Venezuela or in Iran last year, or even after the killing of General Soleimani. It was a very limited strike, and then worked out. Iran responded, and that was it. Job done. Nothing else. And then the thing that I don't understand is the notion that somehow the theocracy in Iran is controlled by MI6 or the French Secret Service, whoever they are. That it was.
Who says that?
Well, there's just this. I'm not. Maybe it was Tom. I don't know, right? But the idea that they got rid of the Shah because he wasn't serving them anymore, and then the Ayatollah Khomeini, he flies over from Paris.
Well, that's true. That is true. They did. They did orchestrate a regime change against the Shah, because Shah was getting uppity, basically.
Mm.
But they got in a Shia theocratic regime that they wanted to control, that they thought they would control, but in fact they do not control them. And this regime has been in power now nearly 40 years. And they wouldn't be, if the regime was working out for them, they wouldn't be so extremely keen on regime changing them. They're not lusting after toppling the Sultan of Brunei. They're not lusting after toppling the Saudi and Qatari and Kuwaiti, Emirati royal families.
Well, initially they intended to have a war between Iran and Iraq. That was the initial British strategy, the Shia versus Sunni. And that was a pretty brutal war, but that was settled. And now you have another move toward potential rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians. And I think the British are unhappy with that and would much rather see an all-out war in the region than to have the Chinese influence, the Russian influence, and a genuine pan-Arab, pan-Muslim movement that's anti-war and pro-development. That goes against everything the British Empire has intended since the mid-1800s.
Okay, so then does Trump want to remove the current Iranian regime, and why? None of his damn business.
I do not think that he does. And in the aftermath of the June 25-minute war, Trump was asked by the press if he wants to press for regime change, and he said no. I think it's very important to realize that when Trump speaks to the public, that Trump is always addressing some audience. And I think that when he's talking about regime change in Iran, you'll see that he's not very adamant. He's not saying the government in Tehran must fall. He's always saying like, well, if they don't this and that, we're going to, he's not, his message is very different from the British, European, Israeli, who are completely on board with the regime change. He is not. But he plays to that in his statements. But we have to look at his actions. He always negotiates with these people. And we found out from Marco Rubio that they've had extensive secret negotiations with the Iranians, which Marco Rubio revealed a few months ago. They also had secret negotiations with Hamas when nobody knew, and then Israelis found out, and they were not very, very happy about that. And then, we also, I don't know, I put myself through some, British and also some Israeli podcasts to, just to see what the mindset is. And they're not very happy with Trump. They are, there was a general named Yitzhak Barak, who gave a podcast interview on an Israeli podcast. And Yitzhak Barak was saying, Trump will not attack Iran. He won't. And they're no longer defending us either. Now, the Americans didn't tell Israelis, you're on your own, we're not going to defend you. What they're telling them is that, look, we've drawn down our supplies of anti-air missiles. And what we have to prioritize for our ships and our military bases in the Middle East. So we just don't have enough to give you. So don't attack Iran if you want to, if you don't want to be pulverized. So, but what you see is that from the Trump administration, they're trying to craft a message. Okay, let it go, dismount this, without saying, we hate you, we are anti-Semites, and we want to do business with Iran instead. But that is, I think that this is, maybe they don't hate the Israelis, but if you look at, if you were a U.S. president, if you were a president of the United States, and you were not compromised to the city of London, to World Economic Forum, to the Israelis, and you look at the situation in the Middle East. So you have Iran, a 3,000, 4,000 year civilization, 90 million population, extraordinarily resource rich, designated as actually the only real power in the region. All these others are like little Sykes-Picot, Potemkin countries, basically.
Yeah.
Tremendous military power, and in a very strategic location, meaning it's like where the north-south international transport corridor traverses, which is extremely important because it's the alternative to the Suez route, right? So you have all kinds of good reasons to make nice with the Iranians, to cooperate, and to do business with them. There's all kinds of upside to that relationship. And then the Chinese and the Russians have this comprehensive, not alliance, but comprehensive cooperation arrangements with the Iranians. So they're an extremely important player in the region.
Well, you're also members of the BRICS now.
Correct. Yes.
And the other factor here, which you're referring to, Alex, is that the Arab neighbors, which in the past were willing to go along with Israel under pressure, including last June, are now seeing that it's not in their interest anymore. And when the Jordanians said they would not allow their airspace given Jordan's record of its history as a British satellite, that tells you something.
Yes.
There is a quasi-realist faction inside the Israeli military that's looked at the difficulties they've had with fighting Hamas and the fact that they're totally dependent on the United States. And then they saw that the Iron Dome was penetrated in the last war, and that they're afraid that Tel Aviv would be the target at this time. And without having a guarantee from all the neighbors as well as the United States. And on that point, Trump is committed to this Abraham Accord. Whatever it ends up being, whether it's more business or a real peace settlement, he's got a commitment to it. And he's gone out of his way with Mohammed bin Salman and others, the Emiratis and so on. So there are a lot of things militating toward peace. And similarly with Ukraine, that the only question is, when will someone tell Zelensky to step down and stop fighting? And I think if that were to happen, you could get a peace in Ukraine.
Ali, before we move to Ukraine, I just want to stay with the Middle East. Because the question that I have, Alex, you say that Trump's administration has stopped supplying weaponry and arms to Israel.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
I just said that this podcast interview that I watched yesterday or day before yesterday with this Israeli general Yitzhak Barak. He was saying that the Americans are telling them that they're running short. They didn't say we're not going to supply you. They said that they're running short, that they have to prioritize their own bases, their own naval. So it's not like we're not supplying you anymore. It's like, terribly sorry, but we don't have enough.
Right.
It's a nuance. But what I also meant to say, so there's all kinds of good reasons for the Americans to have a constructive cooperation arrangement with the Iranians, whereas Israel itself is just a massive money pit. They have nothing basically. Israel is not a resource-rich country other than maybe Palestinian gas fields, and Cypriot gas fields. Their economy is devastated. It'll require very expensive recovery, reconstruction. They're at war on 8 fronts with everybody, and for the United States to come in and fight Israel's wars, there's absolutely catastrophic downside to that equation. Whereas there's no downside with making peace with the Iranians.
Right.
So even if you look at the cold economic calculus of the situation, you wouldn't want to go to war against Iran. You wouldn't want to push for regime change against Iran. You would want to cooperate with them and find some kind of a mutually beneficial arrangement. Whereas if you fight for Israel's corner, there's very little to gain. Everything has to be done by force. As Harley said, you have to put the boots on the ground, but it's not even just the boots on the ground are part of the problem. The other part of the problem, that all your military bases are vulnerable to to Iranian missiles. And we saw what Iranian missiles can do in the 12-day war against Israel. So they can basically wipe out all of their military bases in the Middle East, of which there are, I think, about 60, with 20 to 25,000 troops. It would be absolutely catastrophic. And then, very, very probably the Iranians can sink American aircraft carriers in the region. That, imagine that coming out in the news one day. And for what?
They have sophisticated anti-aircraft also.
Yes.
What this is a fight over is the Wolfowitz doctrine, the post-1990 American unipolar sole superpower And while Trump is committed to keeping America strong and the military strong, I'm not sure he wants to have bases in 100 countries and Americans deployed all over the world on behalf of global corporations. There are some places that are necessary to have a certain amount of U.S. military strength. But even we're finding the military balking at the idea of a war with China over Taiwan. So the idea of pulling back, and there's one other factor here, which is that there really is a potential danger of escalation when you're dealing with Israel. If it looks as though Israel is facing an existential crisis from an Iranian attack, and they don't think the United States will help, it's not inconceivable that they would use their nuclear capability to strike. And one thing that Trump has said repeatedly is that he has a great deal of concern with the danger of nuclear war. And it goes back to his relationship with his uncle, who is a nuclear scientist who worked with the original Manhattan Project during World War II. So, I think there are a lot of factors there. The question is, by accident, as you know from your writings about World War I and the Balkan situation, sometimes you may have an intention to do a bluff or a fake, and it ends up getting out of control. And I think that's the one thing that comes up in the question of the allowing the New START treaty to end. Why there's been a rush in the last couple of days to start up talks again, where it looked like the United States was willing to just let it go.
Yes, I think that there's also a risk of a false flag attack.
Yeah.
Like USS Liberty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier, and let's go to Ukraine. Will somebody please tell Zelensky to give it up? Stop sacrificing Ukrainian lives to this futile endeavor that somehow they're going to defeat the Russians. Harley, will you tell him?
Well, I'm trying to tell the Europeans to stop encouraging him. You look at the budget that was worked out by the European Union. You have countries in Europe which are negative growth rates, farmers rebelling, infrastructure collapsing, and yet there's a commitment to €1 trillion to build up a defense. I was speaking with someone in the retired German general who was saying, if we were to get involved in something on the borderland with Russia, either in the Baltic states or Ukraine, we don't have the logistical capability to move equipment to them because the rail system is broken down. So the idea that somehow you can overnight reverse 20 years of decline, and especially when Germany is running out of reserves of oil and gas. And, if you're relying on wind and solar, this has been a really harsh winter. And the reserves of energy supplies are way down and the costs are way up. So the idea that somehow you can prepare for war, and, when they talked about sending troops, Macron still periodically says, well, we're ready to send French troops there. Maybe he's nostalgic for having lost French West Africa. But if he had a tough time in French West Africa, think about what it'd be for French troops in Ukraine.
Yes, this is true. If Mali, Mauritania, and Burkina Faso can kick out French troops, how are they going to fare against Russians? Yeah.
Or even Ukrainian nationalists.
Yep, absolutely. And it seems kind of absurd that because Europe doesn't have the iron ore or the aluminium or the silver or whatever else it needs, or the oil and the gas. So they would go to
What's your
Russia.
point, Rich? We have our values.
That's okay. That's good, Alex. You build your tanks out of your values with sails on them for wind powered
And
locomotion.
we have a unity.
Well,
Should
and
I
Trump is
divert?
willing to sell weapons to them, but where's the money going to come from?
That's right. Where is going to come from? Strip mining the European citizenry and turning them into serfs.
No, sorry. You guys are, that's obsolete thinking. Money can be printed in unlimited amounts. So it's not a problem at all. It's all
Right.
magic. It's all magic.
Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you for reminding us of that, because you do have a background in finance, and people should follow Alex on his trend compass to find out where the money's going and where you can make money by following
Well,
the
where
major
it's
trends.
coming from. It comes from the taxation of the people of Europe who are not too happy with being taxed, as you know, Rich, from your operation.
Yes. Well, for the UK, people in the UK, if you want to protest against what this government is doing, if you go to notaxforwar.com, and you can find out how you can legally, lawfully, and peacefully withhold your taxes, local and central government, notaxforwar.com. But for people in Europe, what's left is, I suppose, is protest, civil disobedience, because they're not allowing elections. They're certainly not
Well,
doing
something
that.
interesting happened in Germany this week, which is the Munich Security Council decided that they would allow 2 representatives of the Alternative for Deutschland to attend their conference this year. And that is a breach in the firewall to keep the AfD out. So it looks as though there's some realism starting to penetrate, because as Merz's popularity is collapsing, the AfD continues to grow. And so this may be a trial balloon to see if they can live with the Alternative for Deutschland in a German government.
Could it also be an attempt to capture the AfD?
Oh, of course.
Over?
Of course.
So that they end up as captured as Reform have become, and Nigel Farage has become. You know, where even now he talks about, he has said in the past about, we need peace between Ukraine and Russia and stop. And now he's saying, no, we need to support the Ukrainians in their war against Russia. I'm like, what's the difference between you and Starmer now? Why would anybody vote for you? Now, staying with Europe, because we did do a video about the UK and the mess in the UK establishment. So I don't get where is their crazy thinking? They're going to print this money, offer worthless euros to Russia to buy raw materials of Russia, to then convert them into armaments to fight Russia. Can someone help me out here?
It's the Putin delusion that they have. They've convinced themselves that Putin did not have a legitimate reason to go into Ukraine, and therefore all of Europe is threatened. Now, that is, anyone who knows anything about Russian military strategy or the balance of forces in Europe would realize that Putin had a legitimate security concern that he tried to address for about 15 years. And he never had an honest response from Europe. It's not Putin who is the problem, it's the Europeans. And you see that if you look at what happened with the post-Maidan coup, the Minsk Accord, the lying that goes on about who is who in Ukraine. So the Russians haven't changed their position. And Putin has made that clear. That's why there's a problem with the negotiations. He's made it clear that Russia will not stop until it's met the conditions that it set forward. But these are conditions which should have been agreed to. And the longer the Europeans resist, the worse it becomes for Ukraine.
Yeah.
So it's not Putin that's the problem. It's the delusion of the Europeans. And on this, I think Alex has a very clear picture of this. The Europeans have no alternative economic policy other than printing money. They're trying to talk to China about maybe getting more trade. They had this Mercosur potential agreement. Goes nowhere. And, the demand for French wine and Italian pasta can be met in other ways. And the Europeans are on a one-way ticket to hell. And
But
without
Harley,
Alex,
I
sorry,
think that
Alex.
I think that the Mercosur agreement is even worse
Yeah.
than that. I think that the Mercosur agreement is like the repeal of corn laws in the UK.
yes,
That is going to devastate European economy ultimately.
Yeah, because it removes restrictions on goods and food products from South America, thereby undercutting European and Irish farmers, and then
Yes,
further destroying European and Irish farming,
yes.
which is
triggering
good
more
because then we can
inflation.
all eat insects that Bill Gates manufactures in his factories.
Are the price of insects going up?
Oh my god. It doesn't bear thinking about. I think mealworms, you can get them really, really cheap and they're easy and quick to breed. So you can meet demand. You can up production to meet demand real fast. Now, what was I going to say? I've completely forgotten my track, what I was going to say. So back to Ukraine. What alternatives, if there are any, do the Europeans have? And if they don't, what are they going to do to quell, or what are they doing to quell the rise of anti-war populist movements?
Well, look. Obviously, they're pushing hard on the censorship front. They just want everybody to shut up and obey. That's basically it. But it's not the Europeans don't really have their heart in this war.
Do you mean the European people or the establishment?
Yes. I mean the European people.
Oh yeah.
And then you have this very narrow segment of the political establishment who are extremely unpopular in all European countries, who are pushing for war. But even their arguments have completely lost coherence, because obviously you can't be the defender of international law in Ukraine and then have a completely diametrically opposite position when it comes to Israel. And then, when you want to ingratiate yourself with the American administration, then you say like, oh yes, in fact, we are in favor of the United States removing the elected president from Venezuela. But then, when it comes to Greenland, it's a bit different. And then Ukraine is its own case, and then Israel is its own case. So they have no coherence, no legitimacy, no consistency to even have a position that people could say like, okay, we disagree, but at least, they have a principled position on matters of foreign policy. They're all over the place. They bend as the wind blows. And so it's very, very difficult to mobilize, the whole society war effort, if this is your leadership. So I think that the way that this situation will be solved is simply that the current governments are going to fall, and we see that the American administration is making real movements in that direction. So we just saw that because there was this discussion. Oh, they interfere in French elections, they interfered in Irish elections, in Romanian elections, and so forth. It's all in the domain of far right conspiracy theorists who are disgruntled and who don't understand real democracy. But now that the U.S. Department of Justice, or I forget, some official American administration ministry published an official document saying that the EU interfered in elections in these countries. Now you can't just dismiss it. Oh, these are disgruntled far right fanatics who are complaining about things that aren't real. Now you have like a real, potentially diplomatic incident on your hands. you have to respond. How are you going to respond? We already see that the response out of Romanian government is kind of nervous and panicked and incoherent. And there's already pressure to renew the elections, to put Calin Georgescu back on the ballot. And then, I think that this pressure ultimately is going to lead to the current warmongering regimes to fall. And then I think a lot of these problems will take care of themselves.
It's also the case that the EU leadership, Kallas and von der Leyen, are a laughing stock now. There's no one who puts much trust in them. They make these grandiose statements, which very often are untrue, and are trying to whip up the European Union into a war frenzy. And they can keep the opposition quiet at the European Parliament, which I don't think the European Parliament accounts for much as it is. But that doesn't affect the people. The people look at the governments of Europe and they throw their arms up and say, what are we going to do? What's needed is a coordinated offensive. And I don't mean in every country coordinated, but within each country, you have enough opposition. I mean, how does Macron stay in power when he's had 5 prime ministers in the last, 18 months who have been voted out? Starmer has superseded Sunak in unpopularity, I assume. So when is Labour going to fall? And Meretz, the BlackRock government is not very popular. So I think we may see these governments fall. And once that happens, the question is, where does Zelensky go?
Yep. Very good question. Where does Zelensky go? Off to one of his villas, which is why it's so important for people to subscribe, comment, and like, and watch all my videos, but especially the ones with Alex and Harley, who will be on again. We usually record on the first Friday of each month. I'll have the links where you can find them and their work in the description below. This is Rich, Harley, and Alex signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.